welcome everyone to our free support webinar on the healing power of breath, integrating therapeutic breathwork into your practice. And Clinton's going to introduce Dr. Morningstar in a moment. I just want to say that I am Juliet Austin, and I'm based in Vancouver, and I co-own the Mind Body Training Institute with Clinton Power over there. He's in Australia. And I'm a former psychotherapist and current website copywriter. And Clinton is a relationship therapist in Australia based on the East Coast. And he works with people, couples and individuals on their relationship issues.
Thanks, Juliet. Very warm welcome to everyone. I'm Clinton Power, and this is our free webinar, as Juliet mentioned, on breathwork. I know very little about breathwork, so I'm really looking forward to learning a lot today. So let me introduce Dr. Jim Morningstar. Jim is the Director of Transformations Incorporated. He's been a clinical psychologist since 1973. That's an impressive number, Jim. He's a clinical supervisor, a seminar leader, and has pioneered the integration of psychotherapy with such mind-body techniques as breathwork and biospiritual energetics. And he founded and certifies practitioners in the therapeutic breathwork. Jim founded the School of Integrative Psychology in 1980 and the Therapeutic Breathwork Training Program in 1990. And he's authored 5 books in the field of spiritual psychology. And he's the co-director of the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance and the founder of In Wellness. And Jim's 33 years of courses into integrative psychology are actually available online, and through his training programs, he has 4 levels of breathworker certification that can be obtained as a professional breathworker. So a very warm welcome to you, Jim. How are you today?
I am very excited actually to be here. I feel like when I'm talking to people who are in the helping profession, people who have dedicated their lives to working with others, and I'm able to share something that's valuable and also learn with them, I'm at home. So this is exactly where I want to be.
Fantastic. Well, to begin with, let us know what inspired you to develop your unique style of breath work and how has it evolved over the years?
Well, to go way back in my life, when I felt most alive was when I was moving my body. I was involved in a lot of sports activities, and also there was spiritual training and things, but being in a fairly closed religious system, there wasn't a lot of experimentation or exploration, but it was in sports where I could really let my feeling self come out. And so I also, like many people, or maybe even everyone here on the webinar, felt a calling of wanting to work with and help people. And of course, the only way we can do that is by helping ourselves and studying and working. And psychology was my first choice because it had a scientific end to it. And it also had the working with the psyche and the spirit. So I went through the whole program of clinical psychology, 5 years internship with the National Institute of Mental Health. And I knew something was missing. I knew that I did not just want to be a talking head in a box for the rest of my life. So literally 2 days after getting the doctorate, my wife and I got on the airplane and went to Africa. I figured I either was going to have to go through intensive psychoanalysis myself, or I was going to have to go back to the roots of civilization, as it were. And we did know some people in Africa, but it was a journey, as it were, of self-discovery. And in the desert, the Sahara Desert in Africa, I happened upon a book that was left by fellow travelers. And it talked about an evolution in consciousness that was happening in the United States. And it's like I had to go to Africa to find out what was happening in the United States. It immediately caught my attention. And I recognized, oh, there's something here that is looking for incorporating all of human life into the package of evolution. And I came back and got my fingers in the dirt. My wife and I worked in gardening and so on. But I also went back to an internship that I had in working in mental health and discovered that I could bring something else to it because I had begun to discover Gestalt, bioenergetics, and other forms of therapy that involved the body. And that I knew was my calling. That was the path. This was the whole enchilada, so to speak. And not that I knew all the answers, but I knew, for example, working with bioenergetics and Alexander Lowen and taking training with him. He had been a student of Wilhelm Reich. He also was on the fringe of a lot of things in his life. But Alexander Lowen was very grounded. And his wife was a physical therapist. And so he took psychiatry and the learnings of Reich and studied very intensively the first 6 years of development of the human being. And he saw that there were stages that each human being went through, no matter what culture they were in. Stage of first basic safety, and then stage of, is there enough for me in life? Then the stage of beginning to explore, and how much freedom do I have in exploring? Each of these stages required going through a developmental challenge. And each person, each of us as individuals, reach different conclusions about those challenges. How safe is life for me? How much is there for me? How much freedom do I have? What is my identity as a sexual being? Intimacy or expression of feelings. Now, when I say reach a conclusion about that, I don't mean an intellectual syllogism. I mean a posture that we take towards life, something that we literally take in our physical structure as well as our characterological makeup. And this was so fascinating and brilliant to me, Alexander Lowen's work, that I knew that whatever I went into in terms of helping people, I was going to be informed by these postures, these stages. He called them body types. But typology seemed a little rigid to me, like you're this type or you're that type. And that is not how humans, I think, eventually end up as a type. But there are themes that seem to resonate throughout our life. And when I was working with people, and we would seem to come to a place where their resistance came up, where it felt like we're getting stuck here. We're not progressing. If I would go back and look at, well, what's the underlying theme? What's the default mode that a person resorts to when they feel like they're at the boundaries of fear in their life? That often informed me of not only what the theme was, but the tools to work with that theme. So applying this to breathwork. Breathwork is about opening up our breathing mechanism so we have more of a sense of being able to modulate our breathing in ways that help release holding patterns, in ways that help energize, wake ourselves up, or when needed, ways to calm ourselves. But now, these tools of breath work meant something different to each of these body themes, the themes that people tended to carry on in their life. If you folks are interested, and it's appropriate later on, I will actually show you graphics of each of these themes, because I can sit here and talk about them and you have the imagination of what I'm talking about. But if you're interested in seeing graphics, I can show them to you. And you'll say, oh, yeah, I recognize that one. No, sure. I know many people, or maybe I'm like that. I can identify with that. But it's not something that you're captured by. A theme is a platform that you have in life, and you either stay within the limits of that platform and are held by fear, or there are gifts that that platform gives you. And you can expand on those gifts and then have the best of both worlds, so to speak. So, for example, in the first theme about basic safety, well, there's some people for whom that is a major challenge in their life, and they've never totally felt at home in their body or in the world. And so their body responds to that, and it's somewhat frozen and disjointed. Now, we all learn to compensate, and we survive, and we get by, but our body can still hold on to those telltale signs of frozenness. The chest is not going to inhale very deeply. I am protecting my heart. I am very cautious about how open I am with my feelings, what could be dangerous to me. It's like being on red alert most of the time. So a lot of my energy is going to the defense budget rather than domestic affairs that I can explore. And now there are tools then that I will use with bioenergetics and with breathing, with this theme that I would not use with others. For example, if I try to encourage someone to breathe very greatly, fully and freely, and open up in like enforced hyperventilation, this would be the last thing that would be useful. This person would leave their body. I mean, they would not necessarily run out of the room. They could if they had the opportunity. Basically, go into a freeze posture and be there in name, but not in person. And so learning how to calibrate my treatment of the person, not just with the breathing, but also in exploring about events in their life. Do we go right to the most severe traumas that they've had? Not so much. Trust is a basic issue that needs to be developed. Now, I'm not saying anything totally flabbergasting or brand new to any therapist. You intuitively feel these things with people, all right? So this is not like, oh my goodness, I never thought of that. Well, of course, we do, we very intuitively. However, I found that if I have a repertoire of skills in working with that theme, that sometimes even when I might get stuck as a therapist and say, oh, geez, I've tried this, that, and the other thing, and we seem to be going in circles or not progressing, or I'm hitting a brick wall. I have a toolbox that I can go back to and look at, well, wait a minute. Let's go back and just work on basic harmonization of breath and movement. Very simple. Even as Babette Rothschild has talked about working with trauma, well, everything is trauma informed nowadays. We know about fight, flight, and freeze, and we know, but as Babette mentioned, we might have forgotten what some of the original trauma workers developed, and that is you can't really go on to working with the material of trauma until the individual has enough safety to know how to de-escalate the trauma cycle themselves. Otherwise, you're creating a dependency on you to do that for them. No, they don't have to be expert at it, but they have to at least have a little bit of confidence that when they start to go down the rabbit hole of trauma, that they have some tools to work with. And then we can go deeper and so on. And this is especially true of that first stage, which I call psychic sensitive, working with people. So that's what got me into developing therapeutic breathwork, which is breath modulation for the purpose of bringing calmness to the system, but also working with trauma that verbal therapy has difficulty, if not an impossibility, of getting to. because of the defenses that we have built up, which are good things. Defenses around trauma are not bad or evil. They're what we needed to survive at a certain time. But now if we want to thrive and grow, we have to learn how to judiciously let those defenses down and to be able to gain more trust in ourselves. Not just the therapist or the medication or the eye-sensitive movement, but that we have a real self-love that begins to develop from our inner connection with our own source. So therapeutic breathwork then involves these body themes. You don't need to memorize them or be astute with them, but at least have them in the background. Okay, I can see, here's a frozen chest. Here's a frozen chest that is held out so that there's a difficulty really letting down on the exhale, as opposed to those that are collapsed or held in, that have difficulty taking in life. Or there's a difficulty in balancing the inhale and the exhale. So these are tools that are part of the therapeutic breathwork toolbox, along with also working with the emotional body and not just stinking thinking, the tools of cognitive change, which are very important, absolutely, but then also not to be afraid of exploring emotional intelligence and the work with them. So I do inner child work and a spiritual foundation, not a specific religion or a type of spirituality, but spirit just meaning what animates us, what makes us different than a lump of mud. What is that sense of spirit that we have that is important for us to be able to fall back on when our mind and our feelings are frozen? So those are just a few of the things that are in the toolbox for therapeutic breathwork. I went off to give you a little overview of how I got into developing a style of breathwork that incorporated the body, the mind, and the spirit.
Mm-hmm. Now, you touched on this, but I'm wondering if you could expand on and talk more about some of the foundational principles of your specific approach to breathwork.
Foundational principles, I'm somewhat of a reductionist. I like to get back to just some really basic, simple things. And of course, the most basic, simple thing is safety first. The first has got to be safety in rapport that you have with the client, but they've also got to start to feel some degree of safety within themselves. You might say, well, what are contraindications to doing therapeutic breath work? Well, for that matter, doing any sort of intervention. If the person doesn't have ego functioning where they can even have a positive thought about themselves or loving, then giving them tools to work to up their energy is just like giving them more ammunition that they use against themselves. So we've got to establish some degree of safety and self-care for doing any sort of intervention. Now, the intervention for therapeutic breath work is collaborative. It's not I have what you need to heal you, and I'm going to do it to you. No, it's a mutual exploration. And we make this clear right from the start. It's not, I am the healer and you are the sick one. It is about finding the healing agency within you. It's about my being a coach, as it were, to support you in finding the healing agency within you and learning more tools of how to self-care and beyond that, how to actually grow. The people have come to me and said, well, I've done this breath work for a year now and it doesn't work anymore. What do you mean? Well, I just lay down now and do the breathing technique and I just feel good. I say, well, that's not a bad thing. That's great. But breath work was not about finding the boogeyman or looking for trauma or what's wrong with you. It's about feeling energized and alive for doing nothing other of earthly good than breathing. Now, of course, that's rather simplistic. As we start to open up the breathing mechanism, we're opening up the life energy. If anything objects to that, if there are holding patterns, traumas, limited thinking, whatever it is, well, it'll show up and then we'll deal with it. But we're not setting out to find out everything that's wrong with you. We're setting out to find out your strengths. I'm a great fan of Marty Seligman and positive psychology. It's like he's shown that people progress and grow a lot more on building on their strengths than they do in focusing on their weaknesses. So, first one, safety. Second one, collaborative approach. And the third principle is experimental. It's not, okay, I've got the formula, and if you just follow this and don't deviate from it, you'll have happy results. I don't know that. And they don't know it otherwise, or they wouldn't be coming to me. But we have to have permission to experiment, which means go down some blind alleys or to find things that don't work. And we're doing this together. So I'm not in the seat of judgment saying, well, I suggested you breathe this way and you're not getting anywhere, so try harder. You're just not doing it. No. If I suggest something and it seems to fall flat or not going in, okay, we've learned something. We've learned not to do that. Or maybe even we'll learn why that didn't work. And maybe more what will work. So whenever, for example, we're in a session and we may be doing breathing and the person to me looks like their jaw is stiff and they're holding their shoulders a little tight, and they had told me they're having some problem with authority figures stemming from their father. There's a little background there, and I'm a little suspicious. We may be running into some anger here that's held in the body. Okay, it's not quite to the point yet where they're even fully conscious of it. And they don't know quite what to do with it because, of course, when you're dealing with your parent, you both love them, but at the same time, you might have some anger there. And like, they might have been taught in their childhood that's not okay. You only can have loving feelings towards your parent. And it's like, so that provides an inner conflict. So in just opening up the body to allow one to feel more comfortable in letting assertive energy out might be a place to start. Not, let's deal with your anger towards your father. We're not there yet. We just might get the body feeling comfortable with more assertive energy. So I don't say to the client, okay, now I'm going to put pillows here by your side, and I want you to hit the pillow and say, I hate you, Father. Wow. No. First of all, that's my judgment and my theory about what's wrong with them. So I might say, are you willing to experiment with moving a little bit with your body so that that your jaw can free up and your shoulders can free up a little bit? And let's just experiment and see what's there. What feelings are there when you do that? So I'm going to ask you now, as you exhale, to hit the pillows on the side and just feel what's going on in your body at the time. We're exploring. It's not a pass-fail test. And so they get the idea that I'm on their side. Literally, I'm on their side. I'm not confronting them or the authority figure that's trying to get them to find the right answers, which I know and they don't. Because in fact, at times I might have them do an exercise and I'm thinking, okay, this is going to free up some anger there, and sadness comes out or fear comes out. Like, oh, okay, we got the energy moving. Here's what they've discovered. Here's what they're at right now. Let's work with that. So I'm willing to experiment and ask them to experiment to find out what we can both discover in this process and what serves their feeling of more comfort of being in their own body. So safety, collaborative, experimental. And the fourth one doesn't sound like it fits into these categories at all. It's forgiveness. We are going to make mistakes. We need that ability to forgive ourselves for, say, a position that we took in childhood that we now see as, okay, so I thought mom didn't know anything and favored my sister more than me. And so we can forgive ourselves for maybe a position that we took. And that we can eventually then, maybe down the road, have some forgiveness for her. Now, it has for me, and I'm not saying this is the way it should be or the way it should always happen, but sometimes I've had to say, in the session, I might have been encouraging you to express a little more than you were comfortable with. And I recognize that. I'm sorry. I can admit that I've done something that might have not fit for them. And this may be the first time in their life that they've had an authority figure admit that they were wrong. And so, first of all, I've got to be willing to forgive myself and not always be right as the therapist. And judicious self-disclosure. I'm not saying, oh, and here's how I stole cigarettes from the grocery store. No, that's inappropriate. That's self-disclosure around an interaction that took place that's appropriate in the circumstance and that their ego is able to incorporate at that time. So if I can forgive myself, it's like, oh, that's a model. Maybe they can forgive themselves also for some of the things, that positions that they've taken or things that they are holding against themselves that they've done wrong. So those are 4 principles that I like to incorporate, actually any kind of healing, but especially in therapeutic breathwork, where we are trying new things with movement, with expression, with our feeling body, our thinking body.